Hello guys, welcome to part 2 of this playlist. In this video, we will look at how we can build this beautiful chat application using React.js and Socket.io. Now let us look at what we learned so far. So far, we have learned the fundamentals of WebSockets, namely the native browser API and the low-level WS package for the server side. We saw the differences between the HTTP protocol and the WebSocket protocol. We also saw how the server and the client communicate with each other using the socket protocol using something called events. We also talked about the popular Socket.io library and the benefits of using it over the native API. So in this video, we will look at the two most important parts working with Socket.io, which is working with chat rooms. We will allow users to connect to specific rooms with specific people talking about specific topics. And more importantly, we will be working with React.js and how to listen to and emit events using React as the front end. So let us now jump into writing the code for the server as well as the client. So this is the server-side code that we had written in the previous video. We can still make use of most of it. I just want to make one small change right here. I'm just going to remove all the logic that we had written inside of this socket callback. Okay, so we can actually start afresh from it. If you have not watched the first part of this playlist, I would urge you to watch it. But if you haven't, that is perfectly fine. I will still explain things on a very high level. So the first thing that I've done is I've done npm install inside of this directory, which is going to give you the package.json. And once I have done that, I have installed two dependencies right here. So the first thing is I have installed the dependency called socket.io, which is going to help us with all the communication between the client and the server. And also I've installed another package called nodemon, which is a developer dependency, which is going to help us to restart the server every time we make a change to the code so that we don't have to stop it and restart the server manually. Okay. So up here, we are using the ES module imports. We are not using the common.js imports, right? We are not using the require keyword. So you can change that just by adding the type module right here. And it is going to allow this particular syntax, the newer syntax right here. So I've just gone ahead and imported the server from socket.io. I've also imported the Express and I've initialized it right here. And using the Express instance, I am listening to this particular port right here and I'm logging a message to the console. So this function will give you the HTTP server, which acts on the HTTP protocol. Along with the HTTP server, we are also initializing the socket server as well. Okay, so this is how we can instantiate the socket server. It just takes in the HTTP server as a first argument. And the reason why we're doing that is that we want both the WebSocket server as well as the HTTP server to listen on the same port. You can also configure it in various different ways, which we've covered in the first part of this playlist. All right. So this IO is the WebSocket server right here. And anytime a connection event is triggered, this callback is going to be executed. And we are also getting information to the socket that has been established. And guys, this is not the only way to configure it. For example, we've got the HTTP server right here. We've got the WebSocket server right here. We can have it listen to the same port. We can have it listen to different ports, all of which I've covered in the first part of this playlist. I'm linking that down in the description as well. So if you haven't watched that, I would urge you to watch the fundamentals of WebSockets first in order for you to understand this particular tutorial properly. All right, great. Coming back. So anytime a client were to establish a connection with the WebSocket server right here, this socket is going to be triggered and we can do various operations inside of it. Since we're working with React right now, let us go ahead and install the React project inside of this directory. Let me go into the client directory inside of this, and I can now say npx create a React app, and then I can just put a dot. This dot means that install whatever project inside of the current directory, which is inside of this. All right. So let's press enter, and perfect. The React project has been set up inside of the client directory. So let me go inside of the app.js right here, and we can just get rid of all these different lines which we do not want. We don't want this particular class name right here. We can remove all of these things. And let's do some cleanup right here as well. So we don't want the app.css, the test logo, right? Let's delete all of this. So to start off on the client side, let us now go ahead and install the socket.io package for the client. Okay, so to do that, we can just say npm i socket.io -client. Okay, pay attention that we have to say dash client if you're going to use Socket.io on the client side. So for the server side, we have to install the package socket.io. So you would say something like npm I socket.io. But on the client side though, we have to use socket.io dash client. Okay, perfect. So to import it, all you have to do is say import IO from socket.io dash client. As you might recall from the previous video, as soon as the client is initialized or loaded up on the browser, we want the socket connection to be established with the server, the WebSocket server right here. So if I go to the Socket.io documentation right here on how to use it with React, they recommend that you initialize it outside of all the components right here. So let us actually go ahead and do that. So to do that, we can say const socket.io. And then in here, we have to specify the URL on which this particular WebSocket server is listening to. We know that it is listening to port 3001. So let us mention that here. So we can say HTTP localhost colon 3001. Perfect. So let us also leave a small comment here saying that we are initializing the connection. All right. So now that we've initialized it, as soon as the client application is loaded up, the socket connection should be established with the WebSocket server right here. Also, let us actually log something to the console just to make sure that it is getting connected. So we can say something like user, let's say using the dollar symbol, we can say socket ID is connected. So now let us go ahead and run the client, which is npm run start. And now let us run the server as well. We can do something like node index as well, but I'm just going to go ahead and write a simple script for it saying that start, and we can use nodemon, and then I can say index.js. So I'm going to say npm run start. Okay, it says that it cannot find the package express. So let me go ahead and install express as well. Looks like I missed that out. So now let me run npm run start again. And you can see that the server is now listening to port 3001. And now you can see that the client is up as well. So if I were to refresh this page, and if I were to come to the terminal right here, it says user undefined is connected. And the reason why it says undefined here is because, okay, we are not logging the ID, we are logging something else, right? And now you can see that this user with this particular socket ID is connected. So now we know that the client, as soon as it is loaded up, it is getting connected with the WebSocket server right here. Perfect. So now let us actually start building out the UI. So let us actually go to the finished project right here. And this is the first page that we have to build out. So to display this page, we can actually create a separate component right here. So we can actually create a folder called components. And now we can create another folder and we can name it something like join chat form. So let us now go ahead and create the join chat form.js file as well as the CSS for the same. So we can use CSS modules for that. And now I'm quickly going to create a simple React component, and I'm using the RAFCE extension. So if you want the same extension, you can just go ahead and install this particular extension right here. That says ES7 plus React snippets. Okay, coming back. So let's start writing the HTML for the same. And inside of this, first thing we can just have an H1 right here. And this could say join a room to chat. Okay. And coming down, this is where we have to insert a form right here. So the form is first going to have an input field. And this is going to take a few properties. So the first thing is it's going to be a text type. And we can have a placeholder here as well. We can say enter your name. And we can also mention it to be absolutely required, right? So that is what we have, which is the first field. Now let's recreate the same input again. So I can just name this as enter a room ID or a room name, enter a room name, right? That's it. And finally, we're also going to need this particular button right here, right? So let us actually go ahead and create this button, and this button could say something like join room now. Okay. And also make sure that the type of this button is going to be submit right here. Perfect. So let us quickly go ahead and import this component inside of our main app.js file. So I'm going to say join chat form, and you can see that it is getting auto suggested. So looking at the UI right now, you can see that we've got the H1, we've got both the fields, and we've got the button right here as well. The styling though is not the greatest. You don't have to absolutely follow along with what I'm going to do right now, which is to add all the CSS. Understanding the base functionality is a lot more important, but I'm still going to go ahead and add the class names. So I'm going to say class name styles dot join chat container, because this is going to be the container. And we still do not have the styles imported because that will come from this module.css. So let me go ahead and import the styles from join chat form.module.css. Currently though, we do not have anything here, but we will populate it soon. Now coming to the H1, we can give this a style as well. We can give it styles.heading. Okay, and now we have the form, and let's give a class name to the form here as well. We can say form right here. Okay, so again, we've got the input, we've got both the inputs. We can give the class name styles.input, and we can reuse the same thing here as well. Perfect. And finally, we've got the button. We can give a class name of styles.button. And as for the actual styles, I'm just going to copy paste a bunch of CSS. Again, you do not have to follow along with this. I've attached a link to the repository in the description of this particular video. Just go in there, click on the repository, navigate to this particular file or search for this particular file in GitHub, and you should be able to find all of this code. You can just copy paste it. Okay, so now that we've done that, and let me come to the browser. Perfect. Now you can see that everything is looking good. Also, you can see that there are multiple sockets that are getting connected, that are getting logged from the server side, right? And the reason why this is happening is we are restarting the browser multiple times. Okay. Actually, let us do one thing. On the server side, anytime there is a socket connection being established, we are logging it to the console, right? So let us actually do the same thing on the client side as well. Let us see how to do that. So to do that, open up a use effect right here. And also make sure that you pass in an empty dependency array, because we only want this to be run on the first time. So you can say socket.on. Okay, it is listening to the connect event right here. So it is listening to the connect event right here. And as soon as the connection is established, it gives you this callback, and we can just console log here saying that socket connection has been established. So we are attaching an event listener, which is going to trigger this particular callback anytime this particular event is going to be triggered. And also, since we are working with React, anytime this particular component gets unmounted, we don't want the event listener to still be there, because that might contribute to some leakage. So remember that anytime that you're connecting something, you also have to disconnect it. So this function is where the cleanup happens. Okay, so if you were to return a callback function from the use effect, this is a function that runs anytime the particular component unmounts. So if a user were to close their browser, we need to clear this up so that there aren't any leakages. So how can we clear this up? We can say socket.off, and we can pass in the same event here as well. Okay, that is it. Perfect. So what is the next thing that we can do? We have created the join chat form right here, right? So let us actually go ahead and create the chat page as well. So if I go to the finished project right here, which is running on port 3002, if I were to enter my name, and if I were to say something like smartphones, right? That could be a room where people talk about smartphones. And this is the UI that comes up, right? So this is the chat window. So let us now actually go ahead and create another folder right here called chat window. So I can say chat window.js and also chat window.module.css. So again, I'm going to use the same extension right here. And right now I'm just going to leave it as it is. So let us now go ahead and import this chat window component inside of the app.js file. So we can say import chat window from components, chat window, and chat window. Now, we do not want both these components to be showing in the same page at the same time, right? So as soon as the user enters both of this information and clicks on the join room now, only then should this chat window be displayed, right? So we can actually have a local state here to keep track of that. So we can have a boolean like is in room and set is in room. So initially it is going to be false, right? Initially it is going to be false. Initially only this page needs to be shown. So we can have a condition here saying that if the user is in room, then we have to show the chat window, right? We have to show the chat window component. But if the user has not joined a room yet, in that case, we have to show the join chat form component. So let us actually first acquire both of this information right here. So to acquire the name and the room name, I do not want to do it inside of the chat form right here. Okay, so I do not want to do it here, but instead I want to move it to the parent component, which is the app component. And the reason why I want to have the name and the room names and everything here is because that can be shared across both the components. So now let us initialize the username state. So we can say username and set username. And then we can say use state. And initially we can just leave it as an empty string. And the next thing that we want to keep track of is the room name, right? So we can say something like room name, or we can also call it room ID, right? So we can say room ID right here. And similarly, the initial value is going to be an empty string right here. Okay. As soon as the user fills out these details and clicks on this button, the user should be navigated to the chat window page, right? So this value needs to be toggled to true right here. So let us create a function called handle join room. So we can actually say on join, and we can pass in this particular function inside of that. So if I go inside of here, I can destructure the on join method. And down here, I can also create another function called handle submit. Handle submit. Okay. So this handle submit function is what is going to be called when the form is submitted. So we can say on submit, and we can pass in this handle submit. So we are getting the event object right here. We can say e.prevent default. And down here, we can call the on join method that we have passed from the parent right here. So perfect. So anytime a user clicks on this particular button after filling out these details, this function is going to call the on join function, which is sitting inside of the app.js file. So inside of this function, there are two things that we have to do. So if you think about it, when the user fills out the details and clicks on join room, first off, we have to communicate with the WebSocket server and join this particular user to this particular room, right? So that is the first thing that we have to do. Okay. So what is the first thing? Adding user to the room. Okay. And the second operation is we have to toggle this particular value from false to true, right? Only then the user can move on to the second window. So let us do both of those things. Okay. So the second operation is toggling the user to go to the chat window page. So let us now write the code for the first operation. So this is where we have to emit an event to the server side. So we can use this particular socket variable right here. And then we can now say socket.emit. Okay. So we can say socket.emit. And now we have to mention a custom event inside of this. Okay. So now the custom event that we can have is, we can say something like user join room. Okay. So we can use underscores, or we can use camel case, or anything that you want, but we just need to maintain the same constant on the server side as well as the client side. Okay. So what is the data that we want to send to the server? So the data that we want to send to the server could be an object. So we need two things for the server to decide to add this particular username to this ID, to the room ID, right? So we need to send both of this information there, right? So we can say username as well as the room ID. Perfect. And one more thing, we have not actually attached these particular handlers, right? So this value, both of these values are going to be undefined when the user clicks on this. So let me actually comment it out temporarily. So let us actually send the set username first inside. So I can say set username, and also I can also pass in the username as well. Okay. So we've got the set username as well as the username. Let's go into the join chat room, and we can destructure both of that information here as well. So if I come to the first input field, we can say whenever there is an on change event getting triggered, we need to pass this particular set username. And also, anytime this changes, the same value gets updated in the state, right? So this particular value is going to be updated anytime an on change event is emitted, right? So now we also want to two-way bind it. So we are also passing in the username inside of the same function, and then we're attaching it to the value attribute right here. Okay, so we're attaching it to the value attribute so that this line becomes the source of truth. So we're doing something called two-way binding. If you're not familiar with this React concept, I would urge you to go and learn about it. And now let us do the same thing for the room ID as well, or the room name. So I can say set room ID, pass that in here as a prop. And similarly, I can also pass in the room ID. In a similar way, destructure both of that. So we've got the room ID and then the set room ID. And anytime there is a change happening in the second input field, I can attach the event handler right here, and I can also two-way bind the value here as well. Okay, perfect. So let me now test it out if we're actually getting the latest values right here when the user clicks on the join room button. So to do that, we can just console log the username as well as the room ID right here, room ID. All right. So if I come back to the browser and I type my name, Harish, okay, it gives some error here. It says object. And the reason why this is happening is there is no string getting added to the value right here. Okay, so the username is not getting updated to a string, but rather an object. So let us actually go back to where we're setting this particular value. And if we see right here, okay, that's right. This is so we're actually supposed to pass in the value and not the entire event object. So let me just put it inside of an arrow function, and we're getting the event object right here. So e.target.value. So let us do the same thing for this as well. We get the event object right here and we pass in the value. Perfect. And now if I come back to the browser and if I were to type my name and then let's say book club again, and when I click submit, you can see that we're getting both the updated values right here. So right here, we're successfully emitting this particular object to the server. So let us now capture this particular event on the server side. So let's come back to the index.js on the server side. And inside of here, let us add a very simple comment saying, this is where we're going to handle a user joining a room. So we are listening to this particular event right here. So what is the name of the event that we're emitting? We are emitting this event. So let us now capture that particular event on the server side. And right here, so this data is going to contain the username as well as the room ID. So let us now destructure the room ID alone from the data object. And now to add the current user to the room ID, all you have to do is say socket.join, and then you have to pass in the room ID inside of here. That's it. So this line is going to add the current user to this particular room ID. Now coming back to the client side, the next thing that we want to do is we have to toggle the user to go to the chat window page. So we can just use this particular action right here and then set it to true. So let us give this a whirl. And before that, let me just add a very simple console log right here saying that, okay, let's also destructure the username. And we can say this particular user has joined the room with this particular room ID, just to make sure that the event is actually getting emitted and it is being captured on the server side. So we have the terminal opened up right here. So if I were to enter, let's say Harish, and now the room ID or the room name could be, let's say, superheroes. So if I press enter, you can see that it is actually navigating to the next page. But at the same time, right here, you can see that Harish has joined the room superheroes. So this event is successfully getting captured on the server side. So let us now quickly build out the chat window page. So I would want a couple of things from the app.js file to be passed inside of the chat window. I would want the username and then the room ID that the user has entered, as well as the socket information. Okay, so let's pass 3 of this information in here. So we'd want the username, socket, as well as the room ID right here. And in here, we would want some states Okay, so we would want a state to manage the current message. So basically, whichever message that the user is currently typing, we would want a state to keep track of that. So we can say set current message, use state, and then the initial value could be an empty string. Similarly, we would also want an array called messages. Okay, so this is going to be an array of messages which is going to keep track of all the messages that are inside of the window right here. Okay, so we can call it messages plural. And then the initial state of the messages could be an empty array. So in addition to this, we can also keep track of the activity message. So we can say set activity message, and we can also have the initial state to be an empty string. So basically what this activity message is if somebody else were to type, then this would be notified of the same, saying that this person is typing. So that text can be held in this particular variable. All right. And now let us build out some very simple HTML structure right here. So we can call this, let's say, styles.chat container. And let us also quickly import the styles as well. So we would have the styles sitting inside of this module.css. So we can say styles from chat window.module.css. Now coming down, we can have a div right here for the chat header. So we can say styles.chat header, and inside of this chat header, we can have an h2 right here saying that room name is going to be equal to this particular room ID that has been passed from the parent component. Okay. Below this, we can also have a paragraph right here saying that welcome. And then right here, we can actually put in the username. So this is going to be a very nice welcome message that we will see when the user joins this particular chat window. All right. Now coming down. So this div is what is going to house all of the chat messages. So let us give it a fitting name. So we can say styles.chat messages. All right. Now inside of this is where we loop through all of these messages and then we list it out. Okay. So each of those message is going to be an object like this. Okay. And that is going to have several properties. So let us loop through it. So we've got messages and let's map through it. And then we've got each message right here. So let us now destructure all of the properties. So the first one could be the ID, because each message should absolutely carry an ID with it, right? And also we could have the text, right? So this text could be the content of the message. And the third one could be the type of the message. So if you think about it, there could be a couple of types for messages. So a message could be just a notification, right? It could be, this person left the chat, this person joined the chat, right? So that could be a note of type. If it is not a note of type, then it is a normal message. And the fourth thing could be the username. Each message object could also contain the user who has sent that particular message. Now, what is the first thing? So if the type were to be notif, then obviously we need to apply some different styles, right? So let's return a div here and let's apply some different styling right here. And before that, let's also add the key to be this particular ID, right? And let's also add its distinct class name. So the class name could be something like notif. And in here, we can use this particular text. Perfect. So if it is a notif type, then this is what we are going to be returning. But if it is not a notif type, let's say it is a normal message that we exchange with our friends, right? In that case, we need to return something else. So let's return that. So we can have a div, and this div could also take in a key, let's say ID, and let's apply the styles as well. So we can say styles dot. Actually, let's use a very simple string literal here, and we can say styles dot chat message. Okay, so this chat message could be the base styling, but at the same time, we need to apply two different styles. So if you think about it, our messages should ideally be aligned to the right side, right? Whereas if somebody else were to send messages to us, then we want it aligned to the left side. So let us actually make the distinction right here. If the current message username is equal to this username, right? So if this is the case, then we have to apply a different style. We can call it my message, right? If it is not, then we can call the styles as other messages or other message. Okay. Now, Actually, there is a little bit of a conflict here happening. This username is getting drawn from here and it is not getting drawn from here. So I'm just going to remove this temporarily. So we want to ideally compare if the message.username is equal to the current username. Okay, perfect. Now, inside of here, let us add another div. So this div could carry a class name of styles.message text. So inside of here, we can have two different spans. So this first span is to show the username and the second span is to show the actual text. Okay. So coming here, let's actually specify the styling and we can say something like message name or username, right? And then in here, we can actually specify the messages username. And for the second span, we can just pass in the message.text. Perfect. And finally, I'm going to add another div here. And this div is where I want to show the time of the message sent. Okay. So I can give a class name of, let's say, styles.time. And inside of here, we can actually invoke a function which is going to give you the timestamp in the right format that we want. Okay, so this is the finished project. So let us actually go ahead and quickly create a util file right here. And we can just export a simple function saying that get formatted time. Now I'm going to copy paste some code from my GitHub repository. So if you want this particular function, you can just quickly go to the repository, go to util.js and copy paste it. Okay, so let's come back. So let us now invoke this particular function right here. So we can say get formatted time and then let's invoke it. So far we are done with the chat header, which covers this particular portion right here. And we've also covered the chat messages container as well, which is going to take care of this particular section right here. So let us now quickly create this particular form input and button right here. So let's create a form element. So we can give it a class name of, let's say, styles.message form. And inside of here, we can add an input field. And this input field can have a type of text. And we can also have a placeholder of type your messages. And we can also have a value. And inside of this value is where we have the current message. And also whenever there is a change happening, we need to call an event handler. So let us now define this event handler here. We can call it handle input change. This should give us access to the event object. So let us quickly take the value out of the target and we can set the current message to this particular value. Now coming down, we can also add a class name saying that styles.message input. And we can also mention it to be absolutely required as well. So let us now add the button, the final button here. We can mention the type to be submit. And we can also specify a class name saying that we can say styles.send button. And let's call the text as send. So let us actually quickly look at how it looks currently. So if I were to enter my name and let's say superheroes again. Perfect. So here we can see the header section and we've got the form section right here. And we don't see any of this visible because the messages array is going to be empty currently. And now I'm just going to copy paste some styles in the chat window module.css. You can find these styles in the same GitHub repository. And now if I were to go to the application again, you can see that we've got a very nice looking UI. So right now, instead of an empty array right here, let us actually input some dummy data so that we'll actually be able to see how the UI would look like. So let me copy paste some array right here. Each object has an ID, a text and a username and a type of the message. And we've got another object here with the type of notif. And because it is a notif, we don't really require any usernames right here. So this is what gets looped right here. So let us now look at the UI. So if I were to type in Harish, we're essentially typing the username, this particular username right here, right? And let's give this, could be, I don't know, A, B, C, D, E. Okay. So if I join it, you can see that this message, which is coming from me, is on the right side, whereas Tarun's message is coming on the left side, right? And also this right here is the notification message, right? You have joined the room A, B, C, D, E. Okay. So this is what this particular message means. So any further notification messages such as a user disconnected or reconnected, all of those messages can be logged in a very similar fashion down here. So now let us remove this and add everything dynamically. So now let us look at some of the features that we can build. So the first thing could be, when a user sends a message in a room, it needs to be broadcasted to everybody else in the room. Okay, so let us do that. So anytime there is a user entering something like, hey there, let's say, this message needs to go to the server side, and the server has got to broadcast this message to every other client connected. As you would have seen in the previous video, that is called broadcasting. So let us do that. Let us start writing a very simple function called handle send message. So this is a function that needs to be fired anytime the send button or enter is clicked, right? So let us actually attach the event handler to the onSubmit function right here. Perfect. So we get the event object here as well. Let us also do the prevent default. So inside of here, there are two things that we want to do. One thing is that whenever there is a user, let's say this is the current user, if this current user were to send a message, this particular message needs to be added to this particular array right here. So we can say add the message object to the messages array. And the next thing that we want to do is we want to broadcast this message to every other person in this particular room, right? The second operation is broadcast message to everyone else in the room. Okay. It is not going to come to the current person. Okay. So when you broadcast a message, it goes to everybody else except for the current person. So that is why we have to handle this particular case as well. So let us do that first. So we can say set messages, and then we can get the previous messages right here. And then we can say something like, we can destructure the previous messages and then add a new object to it. So here we can have an ID, you can have it as 1, 2 or whatever. And then we need to have the username here as well, which we're getting from here. And the third thing is we need to have a text, and the text could be this current message, right? So whatever is getting typed right here, that is what is getting updated here, right? And that is what we need to add or append to this particular array right here. Okay. And also one more thing, I do not want to hard code numbers like this. And also this particular ID is very predictable, very easy, right? We want it to be a little bit more complicated. So to do that, I'm going to make use of another package right here. So I'm going to go into client and I'm going to install this package called UUID. Okay, it is installed. So let us import that. So if I go to the official documentation right here, you can see that UUID is going to give us some random alphanumeric strings like this. Let's copy paste this particular import, put it here, and we can generate an ID by saying something like UUID, and then we can use this particular method right here. Okay, so this is going to give you an alphanumeric string like this. So we can just directly make use of that here. Perfect. Okay, so the first operation is done. So let's give this a whirl. So coming back here, if I were to type send, and also you can see that this message is properly getting aligned on the right side as well, right? So this is working fine. So let us now broadcast the message to everybody else in the room. So to do that, we first have to emit an event to the server, and the server needs to broadcast it to every other client connected to this particular room right here. Okay, so let us first emit it. So doing that is very simple. Socket.emit. So let us give it a very simple event name. We can call it send message. And in the second argument, we can pass in a few properties as an object, right? So we can pass in the username, and then we can pass in the room ID here as well. And as for the text, we can pass in the current message right here. Okay, that's it. And also finally, I want to clear this out as soon as the message is sent, right? So as soon as the send message is clicked, we want to clear this out as well. So we can say something like set current message, and then we can make it as an empty string right here. Perfect. So let us now consume this event on the server side. So let's come back to the index.js on the server side. Let us create another comment right here. Okay, so we can say something like broadcast the message to everyone in the room. So to listen to this particular event, we can say socket.on, and this gives you a callback here as well. So we can destructure the username and then the room ID as well as the text. So how can we broadcast this message which is this particular message, to everybody else in the room. So to do that, we can say socket dot to and mention this particular room ID right here, and then say emit. Okay. And let's go ahead and mention the event name right here. And then we can emit another object back to the client. And inside of this object, we can specify the username, the text, and we can also mention the type to be a regular message. So if you take a look at the event names that I've used this event name called send message for any event that is getting emitted from the client to the server, right? But whenever there is a message that is getting broadcasted from the server to a lot of clients, I'm using this event name called message. You can still use the same event right here as well. I'm just making a little bit of distinction for readability. So now that we're emitting this message custom event from the server to the client, let us now capture this message event on the client side. So to do that, I can just come back to the chat window, open up a use effect right here. So inside of this, let me put a simple comment saying that receiving messages from the server, right? So in here, let's listen to the message event, and this takes in a callback function. We can destructure the properties that are being passed here. So we've got username, text, and type getting sent, right? So we can destructure the username and then text and then type as well. So anytime there is a message coming from the server, we need to append this message to the messages list right here, right? So any message should carry an ID, right? So let us use the same thing right here as well. And we can say set messages, previous messages. We can spread it out like this. And then inside of here, I can first mention this particular ID, and then we've got the username, and then we've got the text and the type as well. Perfect. So anytime there is a message event coming from the server side, this particular function is going to listen to it, and then it is going to update that particular, or rather append that object to the messages list right here. And also remember, whenever you are initializing an event listener inside of a use effect in React, also make sure that you're taking care of the cleanup as well, right? So for example, if the chat window component were to get unmounted, we still do not want it to be listening to this particular message, right? So let's clean it up. So to do the cleanup, we can return a function like this. And this is the function that gets called whenever the component gets unmounted. So inside of here, we can say socket.off, and we can pass in the same event name inside of here. That's it. So let's give this a whirl, make sure that everything is working fine. Let me also create another tab right here. So to demonstrate this, I've created two different windows right here. So I'm giving this my name, and we can call this room name as ABCDE. Could be something very simple. And also make sure that we are using the same room ID here as well. Okay, so for the name, I can give Tarun, and let's join this room right now. Okay, perfect. Now, if I were to send a message saying that, hey there, Tarun, perfect. You can see that this message is getting broadcasted to every other client connected to this particular room right here. So you can also have 5, 10, 15, 20 windows open. And as long as all those windows are connected to this particular room ID, whatever message that you send will get propagated, or rather broadcasted, to everybody else. So the first feature is done. When a user sends a message in a room, it needs to be broadcasted to everybody else in the room. So what else can we build? When a user joins a room, everybody else in the room should be notified. This should be a pretty good feature to build. So to do this, come back to the server code. So anytime there is a user joining this room, let's say, in addition to connecting this user to this particular room, let us also broadcast a message to every other user connected to this room. Okay, so we can say something like socket.to, and then we've got the room ID already right here. And then we can emit a message. Let's say join room. Okay. And then we can also provide a string right here. So we can say something like username has joined the chat. Perfect. So let us now capture this particular event on the client side. So coming back to the chat window, let us create another use effect. Okay, so let us keep it very organized and neat. We don't want to dump it all inside of this one use effect. So we can give a very simple comment here saying that notifying the current user that a user has joined the room, right? So we can say socket.on user join room, and this takes in the message right here, right? So we are sending a string right here called username has joined the chat. And in here, similar to what we did earlier, we can just copy this particular line, and then we can say set messages brief. So this object takes in the ID. It also takes in the type, and we can now call it notif, right? Because this is going to be a notification message. And finally, what is the content? So to mention the content, we can just use this particular message right here. And also let us do the cleanup right here. So we can say socket.off, and we can pass in the same event name right here. So hopefully this should work fine. Let us give this a whirl. So let me refresh both of these pages now. So here, let me put in my name. We can call it ABCDE again. And similarly, let us also do the same for Tarun as well. ABCDE. Perfect. Because Tarun joined second, the accounts that joined earlier are getting notified of this particular message. Okay, so this feature, when a user joins the room, everybody else in the room should be notified. This is done as well. What else? When a user leaves the room, everybody else in the room should be notified. This also should be pretty straightforward. Let us implement it. So coming back, let us open another use effect right here. So this use effect could take care of notifying users that the current user left. Okay. So whenever this current window, right? Whenever this current window closes, we want everybody else connected to this particular room to be notified that, let's say, Harish has left the chat. So we need some way to capture the event when a user closes their window. So to achieve that, there is a browser event that we can use. So I'm going to do window.addEventListener, and then we can use the event called before unload. So here, this also takes in a callback right here. So this would be a very good place to emit an event to the WebSocket server. Actually, I'm going to move this method outside. So let me just define it right here. I can say handle before unload. And this gives you the event object right here. And in here, so I can say socket.emit. And as for the event name, I'm going to use user underscore left room. Okay, so this is also going to be a custom event right here. And as for the data that we want to pass, I'm going to pass in the username as well as the room ID. Perfect. So I'm going to use this particular method in this area. And as before, I'm going to do some cleanup right here. So we can say we can pretty much use the same thing, but except we can say remove event listener. So let us capture this event on the server side now. So coming down here, I can now say handling a user leaving a room, right? So I can say socket.on. I can listen to user left a room right here. And this takes in a callback function. And we are able to extract the username and the room ID as passed right here, right? So in here, so I can say socket.to, and I can use this particular room ID, and I can emit a message event again. I'm going to pass in the username. From here, I'm also going to pass in the text, and I can say something like username has left the chat, and also make sure that the type is going to be notif. Perfect. So since we're already listening to the message event right here, everything should already work fine. So let us test it out. So as expected, we get the join chat. This also seems to be working fine. Sending messages, right? And receiving messages also seems to be working fine. Hey there, right? So this is also getting updated properly. But if, let's say, this particular window, this particular user were to close the window right here. So similar to what we saw right here, there should be another notification message, right? So let us see if that is happening. So if I close it, perfect. You can now see that Tarun has left the chat. So the third feature that we were building is also done. And finally, let us also build the activity detection. So whenever a user is typing, we want everybody else in the room to be notified of the same. So let us see how to do that. So if you think about it, we need some sort of event getting emitted from the client to the server whenever a user in this room is typing something, right? So whenever a user is typing something here, there needs to be an event that is getting emitted to the server. And it is the server that needs to broadcast that particular activity to everybody else in the room, right? So everything starts from listening in on this particular event right here, which is the change event happening on this input box. So coming down here, and you can see that there is already an event handler written here. So here, in addition to setting the value, we can do one more thing. Okay, so we can actually emit the activity detection to the server right here. So let us emit an event. We can say socket.emit, and we can call it something like user typing. Okay, so these are all custom events. We can name it anything that we want, but we just need to maintain it across the client as well as the server. So we can actually emit the room ID and the username right here, right? Because if you think about it, the server only needs to know who is typing and which room is the person typing in. This is all the information that the server would need to notify the other connected clients. So let us consume this event on the server side now. So let us come down here, and here we can add another comment here saying handling activity detection. So let's listen in on this particular event right here, user underscore typing. And inside of this callback function, we are getting the username as well as the room ID, right? Now in here, the server needs to emit an event back to the client. So we can say only emit to this particular room ID. And what are we going to emit right here? And right here, we can give another event name. I'm just going to reuse the same thing here. And as for the data that I want to emit to the client, I'm just going to provide the username. Okay, so now let us consume it on the client side. I'm just going to create another use effect right here. It's all about the separation of concerns. You can still put all of the event listeners inside of the same use effect. That is completely a preference, but this is what I think would be readable. Also, just one more thing, we don't want the use effect to be called every single time, right? So we might as well provide an empty dependency array right here. And we can also provide in the socket. And the same thing can be done here as well. Again, for the current complexity of the application, these dependencies are not necessary because the username is not going to change. The room ID one set is not going to change. But in the future, if you want to make this application bigger and then the room ID changes with time, then you will have to include it in the dependency array right here. All right, coming back. So this is where we are going to detect the user typing detection. Okay, so we can call it user typing detection. So we can now listen to this user typing event right here. So this is what we are emitting from the server. We are capturing it on the client side. And we are also getting the username inside of the callback, right? So we are getting the username from here. So we can just set the activity message. If you remember, we had an activity message state that we had initialized earlier, right? So we can use this now. So I'm going to use a string literal and I can say the username is typing. And now I can also clear this out. So I can say socket.off user typing. Also guys, let's make sure that this activity message is used. It looks like we haven't used it yet. So let's come down and we can insert it right here. So at the bottom of the chat messages. So right here, we can actually show the message. Okay. So let us open a very simple div tag. And in here, we can say activity message. Let us attach the class names here as well. So we can say something like activity text. Perfect. So let us give this a whirl. So to do that, I'm going to create another window right here. So let's quickly enter details. Great. So now if Harish were to type something like, hey there, Tarun, you can see that the activity detection is working on Tarun's window right here, right? And the same thing can work on this particular window as well. So if Tarun were to type something like, I'm good, the same thing, you can see that it works on Harish's window as well. But obviously you can see that there is a bug right here, right? We only want these messages to be shown whenever the user is typing. We don't want it to always be there, right? So let us make this fix. If you watch the previous video, after like 1 or 2 seconds, we remove it, right? If you remember that logic, I want you to pause the video, try it out yourself in your React code. Okay, let's go ahead with the solution. So the first thing is, let me type it all out and I'll explain it later. So I'm going to declare a timer variable. And the first thing is I'm going to clear this timeout as well. Okay. And now I'm going to assign this timeout to a set timeout callback. And I'm going to set this to 1000 milliseconds or 1 second. And inside of this callback, I'm going to set activity message as empty string. So I'll explain this code in a minute. Let's just see if it is working fine. So let me refresh this page and quickly enter in the details. So if I were to type something like hey there, you can see that it comes up for 1 second and it leaves, right? And the same thing happens for Tarun here as well. So if Tarun were to type hey there, it shows up for just 1 second and leaves. This is the expected behavior. So coming to the code, what we're doing is anytime this particular event comes from the server side, we are setting this message and then we are starting a timer right here. So after 1 second, this gets cleared out to an empty string. Okay. Also, we have this clear timeout right here because we don't want the set timeout to be initialized multiple times. Okay. So if there's like 4 or 5 or 6 or 10, 20 set timeouts in the event loop, then it might become a problem. So we are clearing it out every single time we set this particular message. Okay. Perfect. And that's it, guys. Our chat application has shaped up quite nicely. If you're interested in making this project a full-fledged portfolio project, do feel free to add the below features such as user authentication, user profiles, multimedia support such as images, videos, and audio messages, emojis and reactions, message editing as well as deletion, and a lot more. Also, if you're interested in learning the crucial skill of knowing how to do user authentication, I've got a crash course that will take you from A to Z on everything you need to know about authentication using JWT. So do check it out. And as always, if you have any questions, do comment below and I'll be happy to help out. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.